If you're looking for a new murder mystery series, AMC Plus and Sundance Now are delivering the Australian show Black Snow on both the networks. It's a fairly quick binge, but is it compelling enough to do so? In 1995, 17-year-old Isabel Baker was murdered. The crime shocked her tight-knit community and left the town devastated. The case was never solved, the killer was never found. In 2020, the opening of a time capsule unearths a secret that puts cold case detective James Cormack on the trail of the killer. So this is 6 episodes that will have the first 2 episodes drop at once and then have weekly releases for the rest of the show. Now we follow a cold case detective who has a massive stack of missing and murdered kids to try and solve. He focuses in on one that's over 20 years old where a young woman was murdered. Now, this is a much slower series than you might expect, where a lot of the focus is dedicated to giving us details on a lot of the people who were in the young woman's life at the time. Isabel was smart and somewhat popular with a tight-knit group of friends, and in a presentation that's similar to Showtime's Yellow Jackets, the series shows us what was happening in the past and then how the present people are dealing, coping, remembering, and even acting, as then the detective dives into his investigation. Travis Fimmel plays the detective James Cormack, and I love the tortured soul feeling that he gives his character. There's an ever-present sadness that's in his eyes, which we do also learn about why, but he's got a huge amount of empathy, and that is then mixed with frustrations as he deals with the locals in trying to solve Isabel's murder. Now, I do wish at times that he would have been more demonstrative and large with some of his emotions, and much of the time, he's very reserved and introspective, and it makes him an enigma, which I don't think is a bad thing, but he also comes across way more gentle and meek than you might expect him to be. And the softness of his character, though, it does allow for a lot more calm and probing questions with those involved, allowing him to eke out more information than maybe he could get if he were more large or angry with his actions. Talijah Blackman-Karoa plays Isabel, and I really enjoyed the energy that she brings to the character. She's a bubbly and outgoing person, but she has to rein it in drastically because of her religiously strict household. And this complication adds a lot of dimension to not only her character, but also introduces some doubt within motivations for who could be responsible for her death. And we get about half the series with her in flashbacks, so she's not some faithless victim, but somebody that we can connect with and possibly even like. And this really helps make the mystery more compelling in the long haul. Jemison Power plays the adult version of Isabel's sister Hazel, and she was tough to warm up to at first. And that's not because she's not a likable person, but because she's guarded and standoffish for a lot of this, especially when it comes to dealing with Cormac the detective. And their interactions are weird, to say the least. Where one minute they'll feel like they're becoming friends, or at least working together well, and then in the blink of an eye, they're on the outs. And it is entertaining, but it's also frustrating. But I think it also accurately portrays the emotional roller coaster that Hazel is on with all the new info that's coming to light due to the investigation. And by the end, she does have an arc that's pretty engaging and becomes a great addition to the story, and then serves more than just the role of grieving sister. Now, the show does a pretty good job of making so many people come across as shady or questionable. And that's great when there's a mystery to be solved. I didn't end up guessing the right suspect, which I then appreciated, so when we get to the end resolution, it was a good surprise. Now, I enjoyed the aesthetics of this production, where we feel the isolated feeling that's present in this town, and mainly as a result of personalities and beliefs or maybe cultural norms than because of any physical space. And while there are some remote locations that add to the feeling of isolation, a lot of that vibe comes because of how standoffish or secretive many residents are, especially when it comes to the outsider detective snooping around in their lives and their business. Sprinkled throughout the mystery is a narrative that focuses on the racial relations that have existed in the town, and some of the history is brought to light, which shocks even people who have lived there their entire lives. And there's a good social commentary that begins to take shape about equality, but the commentary never becomes the central focus, even though it can play heavily into the story arcs. And I can see how this show can be somewhat of a frustrating watch because of how drawn out it can feel. There's also a lot of back and forth between the detective and Isabel's family that can be intriguing because of secretive behaviors, but also feels like it takes too long to get to the point, and its sequences are just drawn out to meet some story length requirement rather than having some of the info progress much more efficiently. And because of this reason, I think this is a show that will be way more satisfying if you binge the whole thing rather than watching it week to week. The mystery's a decent one, the characters are rich with development and intrigue, and the filmmaking itself is good, but the pace is slow. I also think that this may be one of those stories and shows that you have to want to be engaged with. I mean, if you're just watching casually, I'm not sure it's going to totally hold your interest. And that's not because it's uninteresting, just that the patient and quiet storytelling, it takes some focus to stay engaged. Now, I wanted to find out what happened to Isabel and if the case would be solved. And because there's also another storyline that dives into the past of the detective, I also wanted to know more about him as well. So both of these things did keep me coming back and wanting to watch more. There's a little bit of sex, no nudity, a lot of profanity, and a bunch of violence. I give Black Snow 2.5 out of 5 couches. So do you enjoy slower mysteries? Are there any that you could maybe recommend to me? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.